When you expect an apology from a narcissistic woman, what you're really expecting is accountability, and that's precisely what her psyche is designed to avoid. To her, saying "I'm sorry" doesn't represent growth or humility, it represents defeat. It means she would have to acknowledge a fracture in her perfect image, to admit that her actions caused pain or harm. And for someone who survives through illusion, that's an unbearable threat to the self she's spent her life constructing. Her entire emotional framework is built on self-preservation. Every interaction, every gesture of remorse is filtered through the question, how does this make me look? If an apology makes her seem weak, she won't give it. If silence makes her seem in control, she'll weaponize it. This is why her apologies, when they appear at all, feel hollow, because they're not born from empathy, they're born from strategy. It's not about healing the relationship, it's about maintaining psychological dominance. At her core, she cannot separate accountability from shame. To admit fault means facing a truth she's spent years running from, that her perfection is an illusion, and that the pain she causes is not a reflection of others, but of herself. So instead of apologizing, she rewrites the story. She convinces herself, and sometimes even you, that she's the one who was wronged. But here's what you must understand. You will never find peace waiting for an apology that was never meant to exist. True closure doesn't come from her acknowledgement. It comes from your recognition of reality. The illusion collapses the moment you stop needing her to validate your pain, and that's when your healing truly begins. For a narcissistic woman, the ego is the axis upon which her entire identity turns. It's not simply self-confidence. It's self-preservation disguised as superiority. Her sense of worth is fragile, but it's wrapped in armor so convincing that even she believes it's invincible. She can't allow herself to be seen as wrong, not because she lacks understanding, but because being wrong feels like psychological annihilation. To apologize would mean tearing a hole in the illusion that sustains her, the illusion of perfection, control, and moral authority. This is where empathy dies. Empathy requires stepping outside the self, acknowledging another's reality as valid and deserving of compassion. But to her, doing that feels like surrendering power. Vulnerability is interpreted as weakness, and weakness invites shame, the one emotion she cannot face. So she builds a fortress around her ego, guarding it with arrogance, deflection, and charm. Every conversation becomes a battlefield where she must win, not connect. The deeper tragedy lies in her blindness to the truth that strength and humility can coexist. Her ego convinces her that domination is protection, that superiority is safety. Yet, in chasing invulnerability, she isolates herself from the very essence of love, mutual understanding. When her ego stands above empathy, no apology can ever be genuine. Because an apology, in its truest form, is an act of humility, a moment where love outweighs pride. And for her, pride is the air she breathes. So remember this, the absence of empathy isn't proof that you are unworthy of it. It's proof that she's trapped in her own reflection, unable to meet you beyond the glass. The moment you see that clearly, you stop trying to fix her and start reclaiming yourself. When a narcissistic woman is confronted with her own mistakes, something fascinating yet deeply destructive happens. She doesn't seek understanding, she seeks escape. But her escape doesn't come through silence or reflection, it comes through projection. Instead of facing her role in the conflict, she instinctively shifts the blame outward. It's a psychological defense mechanism so deeply ingrained that she may not even recognize it herself. In her world, there always has to be a villain, and it can never be her. This reflex is rooted in a fragile self-image that cannot tolerate guilt. To admit fault would create a fracture in her constructed identity, and that fracture would let reality seep in, a reality she has spent years avoiding. So she rewrites the narrative. You become the one who provoked her, misunderstood her, or failed her. The irony is that in her attempt to protect herself from pain, she inflicts it. And because her story feels so convincing, you start questioning your own. That's how emotional confusion and guilt are planted, not by accident, but by design. You'll often notice her saying things like, "You made me act that way," or "If you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have reacted like that." These are not admissions of truth, but tools of distortion. Each phrase is crafted to displace the emotional weight she refuses to carry. A purpose of this blame shifting isn't just to escape accountability, it's to maintain control, because as long as you're the one apologizing, she remains untouchable. The moment you recognize this pattern, you reclaim your clarity, and that clarity is power. When you stop accepting the guilt that doesn't belong to you, her illusion collapses, and your freedom begins. When a narcissistic woman does offer an apology, it rarely comes from a place of remorse. It's not an emotional bridge meant to reconnect. It's a tactical move designed to re-establish control. Her apologies are not about healing wounds, but about managing perception, both yours and her own. They are calculated gestures, carefully timed to maintain her position in the psychological hierarchy. What looks like vulnerability is, in truth, manipulation disguised as humility. You'll often hear the subtle qualifiers in her words. "I'm sorry, but you have to understand, I didn't mean it, but you pushed me too far." Every apology carries a hidden clause, a condition that invalidates the act itself. In her world, saying sorry is only acceptable when it serves a purpose, when it keeps you emotionally invested, when it diffuses tension just enough to stop you from leaving, or when it restores the image she fears losing. It's never unconditional. The philosophy behind her behavior is transactional. Every word, every gesture, every show of emotion is a currency meant to maintain influence. An apology becomes another form of currency, something to spend when she senses distance or resistance. But the value of that currency is counterfeit, because there's no emotional authenticity behind it. This is why her apologies often leave you more confused than comforted. They sound right, but they feel wrong. Deep down, you sense that nothing has truly changed, because it hasn't. Understanding this truth frees you from the endless cycle of false reconciliation. A real apology restores balance. A manipulative one reinforces control. Learn to recognize the difference, because once you stop mistaking strategy for sincerity, you stop being part of her game and start reclaiming your peace. Gaslighting is one of the narcissistic woman's most insidious tools, not just because it distorts reality, but because it erodes your confidence in your own perception of truth. When she refuses to apologize, she doesn't simply deny responsibility, she redefines the entire event. She'll subtly twist your words, question your memory, and reframe your feelings until you start wondering if you're the problem. This psychological sleight of hand isn't random, it's deliberate. It allows her to escape accountability while keeping you emotionally destabilized and dependent on her version of events. You'll hear phrases like, "I never said that," or "You're exaggerating," or the most common one, "You're too sensitive." Each phrase is a quiet assault on your reality. Over time, these distortions chip away at your ability to trust your own judgment. You start second-guessing yourself, apologizing for being hurt, and seeking her approval just to feel balanced again. That's the emotional trap. She replaces your internal compass with hers. Psychologically, this serves a deeper purpose. By keeping you uncertain, she remains the arbiter of truth, and control flows to whoever defines reality. What begins as confusion slowly becomes submission. The apology you were hoping for is replaced with explanation after explanation that subtly makes an individu responsible for her behavior. It's not reconciliation, it's reprogramming. But the moment you name the gaslighting for what it is, the illusion weakens. Awareness is the antidote. Once you trust your own perception again, her words lose their power. You begin to see that her denial was never about the event. It was about maintaining control. And when you stop allowing her to rewrite your story, you reclaim both your truth and your peace. Comes a moment when you realize that the apology you've been waiting for isn't coming, And that realization, though painful, is profoundly liberating. When you've been caught in the orbit of a narcissistic woman, you learn to measure closure by her acknowledgement. You wait for her to finally see the damage, to own the words and actions that tore through your peace. But what you're really waiting for is emotional validation, something she's simply not equipped to give. Expecting empathy from someone who views remorse as weakness is like asking a mirror to reflect your soul. It can only show you the surface. Freedom begins when you stop negotiating with her illusion, when you accept that her silence or deflection is not a reflection of your worth, but of her inability to face her own. This is the turning point, the moment when you withdraw your energy from her chaos and reinvest it in your own healing. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not about her at all. It's not about excusing her behavior. It's about releasing yourself from the emotional dependency that her manipulation created. You may never hear the words, "I'm sorry," but you can give yourself something far more valuable. Closure rooted in truth. You can choose to see her inability to apologize, not as rejection, but as revelation. It reveals her limits, not your failure. When you no longer need her acknowledgement to validate your pain, you reclaim your power. Because true healing isn't found in her confession, it's found in your clarity. And the most powerful act of all is walking away from the illusion, knowing that your peace no longer depends on her permission.